Every morning she took a loaf, and every morning he watched her do it, and he never said a word. That's the part nobody could stand. Not the taking, the watching. A man will let a lot of things happen to him, but there was something in the way Elias Mott just stood there with his hands flat on the counter and let a stranger walk off with his bread that made the whole low market itch. I know because I was there, every day. My stall was right across from his, close enough to smell his ovens. Let me tell you how it started. You have to understand where we were first. Havern Reach isn't a planet. It's a shelf, a long curve of decking bored into the belly of an old asteroid. 3 levels of it hung over nothing. Above us, the Reach had strung up its false suns, these long tubes of light that buzzed when they warmed and hummed when they cooled. And by that hum, you learned to tell the time better than by any clock. When the suns went amber, that was late. When they went that thin blue-white, that was the start of a working day, and the whole low market would begin to wake up under them like something turning over in its sleep. I sold salt glass and dried river moss and little cured things in jars. My people, the Thren, were merchants down to the marrow, and I'd been on that shelf longer than most. Long enough to have watched 3 different humans try to make a living selling to a market that didn't much want them. The first 2 failed. The Reach isn't kind to newcomers, and it's less kind to humans, who came late to this part of the sky and came, most people felt, with too many opinions about how things ought to be done. Elias was the third. He rolled in with 1 crate of tools and 1 crate of grain and a proofing lamp older than my grandfather, and he set up an oven where a spice trader had gone bust the season before. No banners, no lattice ads pushed to your feed. He just started baking. Now I'll be honest with you. When I first smelled it, I didn't know what I was smelling. Bread is not a Thren thing. We don't make it. Most species on the Reach don't. We had ration printers for the poor and slick nutrient parlors for the rich, and everything in between came out of a machine that hummed and beeped and slid your meal across a plate, still faintly warm from the extruder. Food on the Reach was a thing that got assembled. Then this human lit a fire in a metal box and made the air smell like something my body remembered without my ever having lived it. I'm not ashamed to say I crossed the aisle that first week. I bought a loaf. I didn't know what to do with it. I stood there holding this warm, heavy thing, and Elias looked at me. He had this face like weathered decking, all lines, gray coming in at the temples, and he said, "You break it. You don't cut it. Cutting's for when you're alone." I didn't understand him then. I understand him now. So the market got used to him slowly, the way it gets used to anything. The rich still went to their parlors, but the dock crews came to Elias and the low-level clerks, and the maintenance Thren who kept the false suns burning, and the beggars who slept in the warm ducks under level 2. Elias had a rule, and I heard him say it more than once. If you had a chit, you paid. If you didn't have a chit, you got yesterday's loaves for nothing, and you didn't have to say anything about it or look at anybody a certain way. He just wrapped it and slid it across and turned back to his oven so you could take it without being seen taking it. That's a small thing, but you learn a lot about a person from how they let you be poor in front of them. Now I'll tell you about the girl. She showed up when the suns had just started going amber earlier each cycle, the Reach's version of a turning season, when the station's engineers dimmed things to save power, and the whole shelf got a little colder and a little grayer. Hard time of year. The kind of time when the ducks fill up with sleepers. She was Vale. I don't know how much you know about the Vale, so let me just say what it was. There'd been a war. The Ridge War, they called it, though most of us who lived through it just called it the bad years. It had happened a long way from Havern Reach, out along the Marrow Ridge where the shipping lanes braided together, and it had been the kind of war that nobody wins and everybody signs a paper pretending somebody did. When the paper got signed, the Vale were on the wrong side of it, not because they'd done anything. Their homeworld had just been in the wrong place, sitting on the wrong lane, and the fleetership that spoke for them had made the wrong friends. So when it all came apart, the Vale got the bill. You've seen how that goes. A whole people gets turned into a word you say when you want to explain why something is broken. On the Reach, Vale had stopped being a species and become a kind of curse. Vale were what the custodians of the ledger listed under restricted movement. Vale were what got moved to the back of the queue at the ration printers and then, later, quietly off the queue entirely. Debt, they said. Reparations. Their whole population born owing something none of them had ever agreed to. The girl was maybe 9, 10. It's hard to tell with Vale, they're small-boned, gray-skinned, with those big flat eyes that don't blink the way ours do. She was filthy. She wore a coat 3 sizes too big that she'd clearly found rather than been given, and she had a way of moving along the edges of things, close to the walls, quick, the way you move when you've learned that the middle of a room is dangerous. She stopped in front of Elia's stall on a cold amber morning, and she looked at the bread on the rack, and then she looked at Elia's. And she took a loaf. Just took it, right off the front rack in full view at a decent morning hour when the aisle was half full of people. She didn't grab it and bolt. That's what got everybody. A thief grabs and bolts. She just picked it up, held it against her chest with both arms like it was a child of her own and looked at him, steady, waiting. And Elias looked back at her. He had a loaf in his own hands, halfway to the rack. He stopped. The two of them stood there for a long second, and I swear the whole aisle went quiet in that patch of air, the way it does when something is about to go wrong. Then Elias set his loaf down, slowly, and he nodded at her, once. The girl turned and slipped back into the crowd, and she was gone, gray into gray, and the loaf went with her. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then old Trask, who ran the metal recovery stall 2 doors down, laughed this ugly little laugh and said, loud, "You're going to let a Vale rob you in the open, Mott. You'll have every gutter rat on the Reach lined up by tomorrow." Elias just went back to his oven. And that was the first day. She came back the next morning. Same time, same coat. She came out of the crowd like she'd been watching for the right gap in it, and she went to the rack and she took a loaf and she looked at him and he nodded and she went. The third morning, same. The fourth. By the end of the first week, the whole aisle was watching for it. It became a thing people came to see. They'd time their morning tea, the Thren maintenance crews, so they'd be leaning on the rail across from Mott's oven when the amber suns came up, just to watch the little gray one take her loaf, and the human let her. And the talk started. Of course it did. Nothing travels on the Reach faster than talk. Some of it was simple. He's soft, he's a fool, he feels sorry for her, that kind, the easy kind. But some of it went darker, the way talk does when it's got a few days to ferment. What's she to him? Why a Vale of all things? You know what they say about humans and then a look and a shrug and the ugly thing left unsaid but planted anyway. Trask was the worst for it. Trask had lost a cousin in the bad years, out on the ridge, and he'd decided long ago exactly whose fault that was. And it was easier to keep hating a whole species than to sit with the fact that his cousin had died for a paper nobody read. I didn't join in. I want to be clear about that, though I'm not telling you this to make myself look good. I didn't join in, but I didn't stop it either. I just watched, like the rest of them. I'd cross the aisle in the afternoons and buy my loaf, and I'd try, in my roundabout Thren way, to ask. "That child," I said once, breaking my bread the way he'd taught me. "You know she'll bleed you, 1 loaf a day. That's your margin, Elias. That's the difference between staying and going under." He wiped his hands on his apron. He had flour worked so deep into the lines of his knuckles that I don't think it ever fully came out. "I know what a loaf costs," he said. "Then why?" And here's the thing. He didn't answer. He looked at me for a moment with those tired human eyes, and something moved behind them, something old, and then he closed it off and said, "Bread's meant to be given, Aru. That's the whole point of it. Everything else people do with it is a lie they tell themselves." Which is the kind of thing humans say when they don't want to tell you the truth, but can't quite bring themselves to lie. So I let it go, but I kept watching. Now I have to tell you about the machines, because you can't understand what happened next without understanding how the Reach kept its books. Everything on Havern Reach ran through the ledger. I mean everything. The false suns, the air handlers, the water reclamation, the docking clamps, all of it was managed by the custodians, and the custodians managed it through the ledger, this vast lattice of accounting that ran under the decking like a second nervous system. Every transaction on the Reach touched it. You bought a loaf, the chit moved through the ledger. You breathed the recycled air, the ledger logged your share of the cost against your account. And the Vale, remember, were born owing. So every breath a Vale took, every ration, every gram added to a debt figure that could never be paid down, because they weren't allowed the kind of work that pays. It was a machine for turning a people into a permanent liability. Clean. Bloodless. All of it in the accounting, none of it in anyone's hands, so that no one ever had to feel like the person doing it. The custodians had these enforcers. Assessors, they were called. You'd see them move through the market now and then, tall, in that gray custodian carapace armor that made them look less like soldiers and more like walking furniture, with a ledger slate mounted on the forearm that could read your whole account off you at a glance. They didn't carry weapons the way old soldiers did. They didn't need to. An assessor could point that slate at you and freeze your account, your rations, your access to air credit, and you'd be a starving ghost on the shelf within a day. That was the weapon. The ledger was the weapon. And every loaf that little gray girl took off Mott's rack, every single one, was a loaf that never touched the ledger. No chit, no transaction, nothing logged, just bread moving from one pair of hands to another in the open in defiance of the whole system, every morning under the amber suns. I don't think Elias thought about it that way at first. I think he was just feeding a hungry child, but somebody thought about it that way. Somebody always does. Trask, as it turned out, Trask filed a report. You could smell it coming the morning the assessors came. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. The market has a smell when it's afraid, a sourness, a change in the air, all those bodies putting off whatever it is bodies put off when they sense a predator. The dock crews stopped leaning on the rail. The beggars melted out of the ducks and away. Even the false sun seemed to buzz a little louder, or maybe that was just my own blood in my ears. There were two of them. They came down the main aisle side by side, and the crowd opened for them the way water opens for a hull, closing up again behind. Everyone very interested all of a sudden in their own stalls, their own hands, anything but the two gray shapes walking toward Mott's oven. And the girl was there. She'd already come. She had the loaf in her arms. She just turned to go when the assessors stepped into the mouth of Elia's stall and stopped, and one of them raised its forearm, and the ledger slate lit up, and a flat synthetic voice rolled out of the carapace and filled the whole quiet aisle. Unregistered transfer of goods, recipient designation, Vale, juvenile, debt status active, provider designation, Mott, Elias, human, license provisional. A pause. The slate ticked. Provider is in violation of ledger statute regarding transfer of value to a debt-restricted entity. 22 counts. Recurring. 22, she'd taken 22 loaves. Somebody had been counting. Trask had been counting. The girl froze. She had the loaf against her chest, and those big flat eyes were fixed on the assessor, and she'd gone completely still, the way small animals go still, as if stillness could make her not be there. And Elias came out from behind his counter. I'd never seen him do that. In all those seasons, whatever happened, he stayed behind his counter with his hands flat on the wood. That counter was his place in the world, his one small kingdom, and he ruled it from behind. But now he came out around the end of it and he put himself between the assessors and the girl. Not fast, not dramatic. He just walked over and stood there, an old flour-dusted man in an apron between two custodian enforcers and a veiled child, and he crossed his arms. She didn't take anything, Elias said. I gave it. The assessor's slate ticked. Transfer of value to a debt-restricted entity constitutes. I heard you the first time. His voice was quiet, but it carried. That's a thing about Elias I've never been able to explain. The man could go quieter and be heard further. I gave her the bread, every day. Nobody took anything from anybody. Log it against me if you want to log it against somebody. Leave the child out of your book. The second assessor spoke now, and its voice was different. Not the flat statute voice, but something with a person behind it, or the ghost of one. The provider does not appear to understand. Value given to a debt-restricted entity is added to that entity's debt. You have not been feeding this juvenile human. You have been indenturing her. 22 loaves, 22 counts of value received. Her debt has increased each day you gave. And that landed. I watched it land on Elias. I watched the color go out of his face under the flour. Because that was the trap of the thing, you see. That was the beautiful, terrible cleverness of the ledger. He thought he was feeding her, and the machine had been quietly writing every mouthful down as a debt in her name, so that his kindness had been making her poorer, morning after morning, and he hadn't known. He'd been standing behind his counter feeling like a good man, and the whole time the numbers under the decking had been turning his gift into her chains. The aisle was dead silent. Even Trask, who I could see hanging back by his metal stall with his arms folded and his ugly satisfied face, even Trask had gone quiet, because I don't think even Trask had understood it would be like that. I think Trask had wanted the human embarrassed. I don't think he'd understood he was helping to price a child. The girl started to cry. Not loud. Vale don't cry loud. Just this thin high sound and the loaf slipping down in her arms, and she was looking at Elias now instead of the assessors, looking at him like she'd done something to him, like it was her fault. And she said something in the Vale tongue that I didn't understand but didn't need to, because grief sounds the same in every mouth. And Elias knelt down. He got down on the decking on one knee slow, his old knees, so he was level with her, and he took the loaf out of her arms gently, and we all thought he was taking it back, giving it up, ending it, the smart thing, the only thing that made any sense. Instead, he broke it. He broke the loaf in half, the way he taught me, the way you do it when you're not alone, and he pressed one half back into her hands and closed her fingers around it, and he kept the other half himself. And then he stood up with his half of the bread, and he turned to the assessors and he told them why. I had a daughter, Elias said. He said it plain, no shake in his voice, and that plainness was worse than any shaking would have been. Her name was Marin. She was 7 when the Ridge War came through our lane. He turned the half-loaf over in his hands, slow, like he was reading something written on the crust. We weren't soldiers. We weren't anything. We grew grain on a station orbiting a nothing star 3 lanes off the Marrow, and when the fighting came, they closed the lanes. Both sides. Blockade. To starve the other one out, and we were on the inside of it. Nobody moved. The false sons hummed. You want to know what a blockade is when it's not a word in a report. He looked up, and he looked from one assessor to the other, and then out at all of us, at me, at Trask, at the whole silent aisle. It's a station full of grain and no way to ship it. It's watching a warehouse of food you grew with your own hands, and being told by your own government that it's earmarked, it's strategic reserve, it's owed to the war effort, it's on the ledger. It's a number that belongs to someone else, and your child getting thinner every day 3 meters from more grain than she could eat in a lifetime, because the grain has been accounted for and she has not. I heard someone in the crowd draw a breath. Marin died in the 4th month, Elias said. Not of anything, of nothing, of arithmetic. There was food everywhere and it all belonged to the book, and she starved in the middle of a harvest because the numbers said the food wasn't hers. I held her when she went. She weighed nothing. She weighed less than a loaf. He looked at the girl. The girl had stopped crying. She was staring up at him with those big flat gray eyes, and I don't know how much of the words she followed, but she followed the thing underneath them. She followed the whole shape of it. So when the war ended, Elias went on, and they signed their paper and I came out here to the far end of nowhere to be a man who makes bread, I made myself one rule. One, that no child would ever starve in front of me while I had food in my hands. I don't care what the book says the food is worth. I don't care what the book says the child owes. Books don't feed anybody. Bread feeds people. And any system that can take a man's gift to a hungry child and turn it into that child's debt is not a system of accounts. It's the blockade. It's the same blockade. You've just made it so quiet and so clean that the people running it don't have to watch anybody die. He held up his half of the loaf. You want to add this to her debt? Add it. Add all of it. Add every loaf I ever gave her and every loaf I'm going to give her, because I'll tell you right now, Assessor, I'm going to keep giving her bread every morning that I'm alive to bake it, and you can keep writing it in your book. And one day the two of you or two like you will come back here to collect, and you'll find a number so big it means nothing. A debt no one could ever pay, owed by a child who never asked to be born owing. And I want you to look at that number. I want you to look at it and understand that every single point of it is me saying no. That's what it'll be, not a debt. A record of every time one human being refused to let your book decide who gets to eat. The assessor's slate ticked in the silence. And then Elias said the last of it, quiet, right at the two of them. You call it indenturing her, fine. Then I'm the one indenturing her and the debt's to me and I'm calling it paid. Here. He tore a strip off his half-loaf and he pressed it flat against the assessor's slate, against the very reader that was counting all of this, smeared it across the glass, crumbs and all. There's your transaction, paid in full, in bread, the only currency that was ever real. I have thought about that moment a great deal since. What made it work? Because it did work, I'm getting to that, and it shouldn't have. By every law of the reach, those two assessors should have frozen his account then and there, and hers, and left the both of them to starve in the ducks as an example, and gone home, and it would all have been very legal. I think what made it work is that the thing Elias said was true, and true in a way the machines weren't built to survive. Because the assessors weren't machines, not all the way. That's the part the custodians don't like you to remember. There's a person in the carapace. There always is. And a person can hear a thing said plainly enough, at the right moment, in front of enough witnesses, and have it get past all the accounting and touch whatever's left of them underneath. The first assessor, the statute one, the flat one, it just stood there. Its slate had gone dark where the bread smeared it. It didn't try to clean it. The second one, the one with the ghost of a person in its voice, was quiet for a long time. And then it said, and I'll never forget this, it said, in that not quite flat voice, I was on the ridge. Just that. I was on the ridge, human, on a ship enforcing a lane. I know what a blockade is. A pause. The false suns hummed. I have carried a great many numbers since. It is easier than carrying the other thing. And it reached up, this tall gray armored enforcer of the ledger, and it turned off its own slate, powered it down. The light died on its forearm, and it said, transaction not found. There is no record of any transfer at this stall. The report was filed in error. It turned to its partner. And there was a moment, a real moment, where the whole aisle held its breath because the other one could have overridden it, could have logged the whole thing and logged its partner too. And the first assessor looked at the bread smeared across its dead slate, and it looked at the girl, and it looked at the old man standing there with half a loaf in his flour-white hands. And it said, confirmed, report filed in error, no transaction. And they turned, the two of them, and they walked back up the main aisle the way they'd come, and the crowd opened for them and closed behind them, and they were gone. For a moment nobody did anything. Then somebody at the back started, I don't even know how to describe it, not applause, Thren don't clap. It was a sound my people make with the throat, low all together, a kind of hum that means we witness this and we hold it true. And it spread. It went down the aisle stall by stall, this low holding hum, and even some of the humans and the other species picked up their own version of it, whatever their bodies could make, until the whole low market was making one sound, and the false suns hummed over the top of it, and it all braided together into something I don't have a word for. Trask didn't make the sound. Trask had already gone back into his stall and pulled the shutter halfway down. I saw him go. I don't think he ever came out and looked Elias in the eye again. Some men can't stand to be near the thing they tried to break and failed. He moved his stall to level 3 within the season. Good riddance, I say, and I'm a merchant. I don't say that about paying custom lightly. The girl was still standing there with her half of the broken loaf. Elias knelt down again in front of her, and this time he didn't take the bread. He just looked at her and he said, gentle, "What's your name?" And she told him. It was the first time I'd ever heard her voice make a word I could hold on to. She said, "Ith." "Ith," he said, like he was learning it, like it mattered. "All right, Ith. You come every morning, you don't take, you don't ask. You just come and there'll be bread and it's yours and it's not on anybody's book. You understand, it's not a loan, it's not a gift you owe me back for. It's just yours. Because you're hungry and I've got it. That's all, that's the whole of it." She looked at him for a long time with those flat gray eyes. Then she broke off a piece of her half loaf, her own bread, the bread that was hers, and she held it up to him. And the old man's face did something I'd never seen it do. It came apart, just for a second, all those weathered lines going soft, and I understood that in all the seasons I'd known him, I had never once seen Elias Mott be given anything. He gave. That was his whole shape in the world. He stood behind his counter and he gave and he let people take without being seen. Nobody had handed him back so much as a crumb. He took the piece from her hand. And he ate it right there, kneeling on the cold decking under the amber suns, with the whole market holding its breath. She came every morning after that, for years. She grew up around that oven. Elias taught her the trade, the proofing, the folding, the reading of the crust, the difference between a fire that's ready and a fire that only looks it. By the time she was tall, gray and lean and quick-handed, she was baking beside him, and the sign over the stall had 2 names on it, and half the low market got its morning bread from a human and a veil working shoulder to shoulder in the heat, and nobody remembered anymore that this was ever supposed to be strange. The ledger never did come to collect. Whatever that assessor did or didn't do that day, whatever it turned off and left off, the number never came due. I like to think there's a person in gray carapace out there somewhere who carries that one small emptiness in the accounts on purpose, who chose to keep carrying the other thing after all. Elias got old. Humans do that faster than they should. There came a morning a few seasons back when the oven was lit and the bread was on the rack, but he didn't come out around the counter, and it was Ith who stepped into the mouth of the stall, grown now, to tell the aisle that the old man had gone in his sleep. Quiet, full, not of nothing, not of arithmetic, just of a long life spent behind a counter giving. She kept baking, she keeps baking still. And every morning I've seen her do it. I cross the aisle to watch, an old Thren getting older, every morning before she sells a single loaf, before the amber suns have fully warmed. She takes one loaf off the front rack and she breaks it in half and she sets one half aside on the corner of the counter where the light falls. For nobody, for anybody, for whatever hungry thing comes along the wall close and quick and looking for the middle of the room to be safe. I asked her about it once, why she still does it when there's no one there to give it to. And she looked at me with those big flat gray eyes, and she said the thing he used to say, but she said it like it was hers now, like it had always been hers. Bread's meant to be given. Everything else people do with it is a lie they tell themselves. She learned that from a human, but then so did I. Break it, don't cut it, cutting's for when you're alone. And on Havern Reach, under the humming suns, because of one stubborn old man who lit a fire in a metal box and refused to let a book decide who got to eat, none of us ever really are.